Growing up in a small, tight-knit community, the church played a central role in our lives. My family, like many others, attended services every Sunday without fail. The serene atmosphere, the gentle hum of hymns, and the sense of belonging drew me in from a young age. By the time I was 10, I had already expressed my desire to become an altar boy. The prospect of serving at the altar, assisting the priest, and being a part of the sacred rituals filled me with a sense of purpose and excitement. My journey as an altar boy began humbly. I remember the first day vividly. My heart pounded with a mix of nervousness and anticipation as I donned the simple white robe for the first time. The older altar boys welcomed me warmly, guiding me through my duties. Lighting candles, carrying the cross during processions, and assisting during the Eucharist quickly became second nature. Each task, no matter how small, felt significant and sacred. The priest, Father Antonio, was a kind and wise man who had served our community for decades. He had a gentle demeanor that put everyone at ease, yet he commanded respect effortlessly. Under his guidance, I learned not just the practical aspects of my duties, but also the deeper spiritual meanings behind them. Father Antonio often spoke to us about the importance of faith, humility, and service. He encouraged us to see our roles as more than just tasks, but as acts of devotion and love for God and our community. As the years passed, my dedication and commitment did not go unnoticed. I took on more responsibilities and grew in confidence. By the time I was 15, I had become one of the most trusted altar boys, known for my reliability and attention to detail. This dedication led to my promotion to the role of ceremonialist, a position that came with increased responsibilities and a distinctive tunic that symbolized my new status. Receiving my new tunic was a moment of pride and honor. Father Antonio presented it to me during a special ceremony, acknowledging my years of service and commitment. The tunic was more than just a piece of clothing. It was a symbol of my growth and my deeper involvement in the church sacred rituals. Along with the tunic came a new set of instructions, some of which were routine, while others were more peculiar and would later prove to be of great significance. My journey as an altar boy had been a path of learning, growth, and deeper faith. Little did I know that the new responsibilities and strange instructions would soon lead me into a series of unexpected and unsettling experiences, forever altering my perception of the seemingly tranquil world of the church. As I continued my journey within the church, my role evolved and my responsibilities increased. The small tasks that once felt monumental as a young altar boy gradually became routine, and my confidence grew with each passing service. My dedication and reliability did not go unnoticed, and the clergy began to trust me with more significant duties. By the age of 13, I had become one of the senior altar boys. This position came with a sense of authority and respect from both my peers and the congregation. I was now responsible for training the younger altar boys, ensuring they understood their roles and performed their duties with the same reverence I had been taught. It was a role I took seriously, understanding that my guidance would shape their experiences and devotion. The promotion to ceremonialist was both an honor and a challenge. This position required a deeper understanding of the liturgy and the ability to perform complex ceremonial duties with precision and grace. The ceremonialist was essentially the right hand of the priest during services, responsible for coordinating the altar boys, assisting in the preparation of the Eucharist, and ensuring that every aspect of the Mass proceeded smoothly. The ceremonialist's tunic was distinct, adorned with intricate embroidery and a symbol of higher rank. When Father Antonio presented it to me, I felt a surge of pride and a renewed sense of purpose. This new role was not just a testament to my dedication, but also a significant step in my spiritual journey. I was now entrusted with tasks that required a keen eye for detail and a deep understanding of the sacred traditions of the Church. With the new tunic came a set of instructions from Father Antonio. Some were familiar, emphasizing the importance of our duties and the need to uphold the sanctity of the Church. However, there were also specific directives that piqued my curiosity. Among them was the unusual instruction to be vigilant for individuals, particularly women, who might take the Eucharist without consuming it. At the time, I found this directive odd, but did not question it, trusting that Father Antonio had his reasons. My new responsibilities also included overseeing the proper handling of sacred objects and ensuring that the altar was prepared with meticulous care. Each Mass became a coordinated effort where every movement and gesture had to be executed flawlessly. The role demanded not just physical presence, but also mental acuity and spiritual dedication. Father Antonio took the time to mentor me personally, sharing his wisdom and insights into the deeper meanings behind our rituals. He spoke of the Eucharist's profound significance, the importance of maintaining the sanctity of the altar, and the need to protect the Church from any potential sacrilege. His teachings resonated with me, deepening my faith and understanding of my role. As a ceremonialist, I was also more involved in the preparation for major religious events and holidays. The Easter Vigil, Christmas Midnight Mass, and other significant celebrations required weeks of preparation. Coordinating with the choir, ensuring the proper arrangement of candles and flowers, and rehearsing the complex ceremonies became part of my routine. These experiences were both demanding and rewarding, reinforcing my sense of duty and commitment to the Church. My promotion marked a significant milestone in my life. It was a period of growth, both spiritually and personally. I had earned the trust and respect of Father Antonio and the congregation, and I was determined to uphold the responsibilities that came with my new role. Little did I know that this increased responsibility would soon lead me to witness and confront the darker, hidden aspects of our seemingly serene and sacred environment. Receiving the ceremonialist tunic was a moment of immense pride, but it also came with a unique set of responsibilities that I had not anticipated. Among the instructions given to me by Father Antonio, one stood out as particularly strange. After the ceremony, where I was officially promoted, Father Antonio took me aside and explained a peculiar duty that I would now be responsible for. He started by emphasizing the importance of the Eucharist, explaining that it is considered the true body of Christ and must be treated with the utmost reverence. I listened intently, nodding along, as this was something I had already been taught. However, he then mentioned a specific instruction that caught me off guard. Father Antonio instructed me to keep a vigilant eye on the congregation, particularly focusing on those who might take the Eucharist but not consume it. At times, he said with a grave expression, there are individuals who attempt to take the consecrated host for purposes other than communion. He paused, allowing the weight of his word to sink in. I furrowed my brow, unsure of what he meant. Seeing my confusion, he elaborated further. There have been instances where people, particularly women, take the host and keep it instead of consuming it. Some of these individuals may have ill intentions, seeking to use the sacred host for rituals or other purposes that are not in line with our faith. The concept seemed bizarre to me. Why would anyone want to take the Eucharist for anything other than communion? Father Antonio's expression was serious, and his tone indicated that this was not a matter to be taken lightly. He explained that while most people who took the host without consuming it did so for innocent reasons, such as bringing it to a sick relative who couldn't attend Mass, there were others who had more sinister motives. To protect the sanctity of the Eucharist, it is your duty to observe the congregation during communion, he instructed. If you notice anyone, especially women, who do not consume the host, you must discreetly inform me. We have to ensure that the host is not being taken for improper uses. This directive left me feeling a mix of curiosity and unease. It was an unusual task, one that seemed out of place within the sacred and peaceful confines of our church. Nevertheless, I trusted Father Antonio's judgment. He had been a guiding force in my spiritual journey, and I believed there must be a good reason for this instruction. Over the following weeks, I began to incorporate this new duty into my routine. During communion, I would position myself in a way that allowed me to observe the congregation without being intrusive. It required a delicate balance of attentiveness and discretion. I had to watch closely, but without making it obvious that I was monitoring people's actions. At first, it felt awkward and invasive. I questioned whether it was really necessary, often feeling guilty for suspecting the intentions of our churchgoers. However, as Father Antonio had explained, the sanctity of the Eucharist was paramount, and it was my responsibility to ensure it was respected. My vigilance did not go unnoticed by the other altar boys, and some of them even asked about my new duty. I explained it as best as I could, emphasizing the importance of protecting the Eucharist. They understood, but, like me, found it a bit strange. This strange instruction added a layer of complexity to my role. It was a constant reminder that beneath the serene surface of our church life, there were hidden challenges and threats that we needed to be aware of. Little did I know that this peculiar duty would soon lead me to a series of startling encounters that would forever change my perspective on our sacred rituals. Several months passed after receiving the strange instruction from Father Antonio. By then, I had grown accustomed to my new role as a ceremonialist, balancing my traditional duties with the added responsibility of discreetly monitoring the congregation during communion. Although I had not yet witnessed anything out of the ordinary, I remained vigilant, understanding the importance of this task. One Sunday morning, as the sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the pews, I took my usual position near the altar. The Mass proceeded as it always did, with hymns and prayers filling the air. The time for communion arrived, and I watched as the congregation began to form a line, approaching the altar to receive the Eucharist. My eyes scanned the faces of the parishioners, looking for anything unusual. As I observed, I noticed a woman I hadn't seen before. She was dressed in a modest but elegant outfit, her hair neatly tied back, and she moved with a certain grace. Something about her caught my attention, and I decided to keep a closer watch. The woman received the host from Father Antonio, but instead of consuming it immediately, she hesitated. My heart rate quickened as I saw her subtly slip the Eucharist into her hand and lower it to her side. She then turned and began to walk back to her pew. This was exactly what Father Antonio had warned me about. I knew I had to act quickly but discreetly. My mind raced as I recalled Father Antonio's instructions. I took a deep breath, steadied my nerves, and approached the priest. Leaning in close, I whispered, "Father, the woman in the blue dress did not consume the host." Father Antonio's expression remained calm, but his eyes showed a flicker of concern. He nodded and quietly instructed me to notify the welcome team to intercept the woman at the exit. "We must handle this delicately," he reminded me. I nodded and hurried down the aisle, doing my best to remain inconspicuous. The welcome team, a group of dedicated volunteers who greeted parishioners at the door, were positioned near the entrance. I approached them and relayed Father Antonio's instructions. They nodded in understanding, ready to carry out the task with the same level of discretion and respect that the situation demanded. As the Mass continued, I couldn't help but glance back at the woman occasionally. She seemed unaware of the commotion she had caused, her expression serene as she sat quietly in her pew. My heart pounded with anticipation, and I prayed that the situation would be resolved peacefully. When the Mass concluded and the congregation began to file out of the church, the welcome team discreetly moved into position. The woman in the blue dress made her way toward the exit, and as she approached, the team gently intercepted her. "Excuse me, Mom," one of the volunteers said with a polite smile. "Father Antonio would like to have a word with you." The woman's face registered mild surprise, but she nodded and followed the volunteer back toward the altar. Father Antonio was waiting, his expression composed but serious. I stood by his side, feeling a mixture of anxiety and curiosity about what would happen next. "Good morning," Father Antonio greeted the woman kindly. "I noticed that you did not consume the host during communion. May I ask why?" His tone was gentle, but there was an unmistakable firmness in his voice. The woman hesitated, then replied, "I meant no disrespect. I was planning to take it home for a family member who is ill." She reached into her pocket and produced the host, holding it out to Father Antonio. Father Antonio took the host, his expression softening slightly. "I understand your intentions," he said. "However, it is important that the Eucharist is consumed here in the church. If your family member is unable to attend Mass, I can arrange to visit and provide them with communion." The woman nodded, looking somewhat relieved. "Thank you, Father. I didn't realize it was an issue." Father Antonio smiled warmly. "No harm done. Please remember this in the future. The sanctity of the Eucharist is something we must always uphold." With that, the woman thanked Father Antonio and left the church, and the tension that had built up within me slowly began to dissipate. This first encounter had been resolved peacefully, but it was a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and the sacred duty I had been entrusted with. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a series of similar incidents that would test my faith and understanding of the world within our church. The memory of that first encounter stayed with me, but it was only the beginning. As weeks turned into months, my vigilance during communion became second nature. It was a typical Sunday when the next significant incident occurred, one that would be far more unsettling than the first. The Mass was proceeding as usual. The choir's harmonious voices filled the church, creating an atmosphere of reverence and peace. As communion began, I positioned myself where I could unobtrusively observe the congregation. My eyes scanned the faces of the parishioners, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Then I saw her, a woman I hadn't noticed before, dressed in dark flowing clothes that contrasted sharply with the bright interior of the church. She moved with an air of confidence, almost as if she had a specific purpose. As she approached the altar, something about her demeanor set off alarm bells in my mind. Father Antonio offered her the Eucharist, and I watched closely. She took the host, but did not consume it. Instead, she clenched her fist around it and began to turn away. My heart raced as I realized this was exactly the kind of situation Father Antonio had prepared me for. I acted quickly, stepping toward Father Antonio and whispering urgently, Father, the woman in black. She didn't consume the host. He gave a barely perceptible nod and signaled for me to proceed with the next steps. I discreetly left the altar and made my way to the welcome team stationed near the entrance. "We have another one," I said quietly, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "The woman in black. Father wants you to stop her from leaving and bring her to him." The welcome team, ever composed and professional, nodded in understanding. They knew the drill by now. As the Mass continued, my focus remained divided between my ceremonial duties and the unfolding situation. When the Mass concluded, I watched as the congregation began to file out. The woman in black moved toward the exit, her pace unhurried. The welcome team intercepted her gently but firmly. "Excuse me, ma'am," one of the volunteers said, her tone polite but authoritative. "Father Antonio would like to speak with you." The woman's expression shifted from serene to wary, but she complied, allowing herself to be guided back toward the altar. I joined Father Antonio as he descended from the altar, ready to support him in whatever way I could. "Good morning," Father Antonio greeted the woman with his usual calm demeanor. "I noticed that you did not consume the host during communion. May I ask why?" The woman's eyes flickered with irritation. "I have my reasons," she replied curtly. "It's personal." Father Antonio maintained his gentle but firm tone. "I understand, but it is important for us to know. The Eucharist is a sacred part of our faith, and we must ensure it is treated with the utmost respect. If you are taking it for a valid reason, we can certainly make arrangements to accommodate that." The woman sighed, clearly growing impatient. "Fine," she said, her voice edged with frustration. "I said I was going to use it for a ritual." The words hung in the air and a chill ran down my spine. The calm atmosphere of the church seemed to darken. Father Antonio's expression hardened slightly. "A ritual?" he repeated, his voice carrying a note of disapproval. The woman met his gaze defiantly. "Yes, it's for a ritual, and it's my business, not yours." Father Antonio's demeanor remained composed, but there was an undeniable authority in his voice as he spoke. "The Eucharist is not to be used for such purposes. It is a sacred element of our faith, and its sanctity must be preserved. I must ask you to return the host immediately." Reluctantly, the woman reached into her pocket and produced the host, handing it back to Father Antonio. "There you go," she said with a hint of sarcasm. "Happy now?" Father Antonio took the host, his expression grave. "Thou must understand that using the Eucharist for rituals is unacceptable and deeply disrespectful to our faith. I must insist that you do not return to this church if you intend to misuse our sacred elements again." The woman's eyes flashed with anger, but she said nothing more. She turned on her heel and walked briskly toward the exit, her dark figure quickly disappearing from view. The tension in the air slowly dissipated, but the unsettling feeling lingered. After she left, Father Antonio and I stood in silence for a moment. He then turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "This is why we must remain vigilant," he said quietly. "The sanctity of the Eucharist must be protected at all costs." I nodded, absorbing the gravity of the situation. This encounter had been more intense than the first, and it was a stark reminder of the challenges we faced in safeguarding our faith. As I resumed my duties, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a series of encounters that would test our resolve and commitment to protecting the sacred elements of our church. The unsettling encounter with the woman in black left a lasting impression on me, but it was only a prelude to the events that would follow. The vigilance that Father Antonio had instilled in me became even more critical as more incidents began to surface. The church, once a place of serene worship and unshakable faith, now felt like a battleground where we had to protect the sanctity of our rituals from being violated. It was a few weeks later when another incident occurred, even more disturbing than the last. The church was filled with the usual congregation, their voices rising in unison during hymns and prayers. As communion approached, I took my customary position, eyes scanning the line of parishioners with practiced vigilance. Among the familiar faces, one woman stood out. She was middle-aged, dressed in plain clothing, but there was something about her demeanor that seemed off. As she approached the altar, I watched her closely. Father Antonio handed her the Eucharist, and instead of consuming it, she quickly slipped it into her pocket and began to walk away. My heart skipped a beat. This was it again. I quickly informed Father Antonio, who maintained his calm exterior, but nodded for me to proceed. I signaled the welcome team, who intercepted the woman as she tried to leave the church. "Excuse me, ma'am," one of the volunteers said politely but firmly. "Father Antonio would like to speak with you." The woman seemed startled, but reluctantly followed the volunteer back toward the altar. Father Antonio was waiting, his expression a mix of concern and authority. I stood by his side, ready to assist in whatever way I could. "Good morning," Father Antonio greeted her, his tone firm yet kind. "I noticed that you did not consume the host during communion. May I ask why?" The woman hesitated, looking around nervously. I was going to take it home," she stammered. Father Antonio's eyes narrowed slightly, but he kept his voice calm. "For what purpose? If it is for a valid reason, we can make arrangements to ensure it is done properly." The woman's eyes darted around, and I could see the anxiety in her expression. "It's personal," she muttered. Father Antonio maintained his calm demeanor, but there was a hint of sternness in his voice. "The Eucharist is a sacred part of our faith and must be treated with the utmost respect. If you do not have a valid reason for taking it, I must ask you to return it." The woman's face flushed with anger. "I don't need to explain myself to you," she snapped. Father Antonio's expression hardened. "I'm afraid you do. The sanctity of the Eucharist must be upheld. Please return it now." The woman reached into her pocket and reluctantly handed the host back to Father Antonio. "There, are you happy now?" she said with a hint of defiance. Father Antonio took the host and looked at her sternly. "You must understand that taking the Eucharist for purposes other than communion is a serious matter. If you are in need, we can help, but you must not misuse our sacred elements. Do you understand?" The woman glared at him but nodded. "Fine," she muttered and turned to leave. As she walked away, Father Antonio called after her, "And please, do not attempt this again. The church is here to help, but we cannot tolerate such actions." The woman didn't respond, quickly making her way out of the church. The tension in the air slowly dissipated, but the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on me. After she left, Father Antonio and I stood in silence for a moment. He then turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "This is why we must remain vigilant," he said quietly. "The sanctity of the Eucharist must be protected at all costs." I nodded, absorbing the gravity of the situation. This encounter had been more intense than the first, and it was a stark reminder of the challenges we faced in safeguarding our faith. As I resumed my duties, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a series of encounters that would test our resolve and commitment to protecting the sacred elements of our church. Father Antonio's firm yet compassionate handling of the situation left a deep impression on me. It was a delicate balance between upholding the sanctity of our rituals and showing understanding and compassion to those who might not fully grasp their significance. This incident solidified my understanding of the importance of our vigilance and the sacred duty we had to protect the Eucharist from any form of misuse. In the weeks that followed, I remained alert, ever mindful of the responsibility I carried. Each Sunday brought a new set of faces, and with them, the potential for similar incidents. The church, once a sanctuary of unblemished faith, now felt like a fortress that needed guarding. And I, along with Father Antonio, was at the forefront of this silent battle, determined to preserve the sanctity of our sacred rituals. The unsettling events continued to unfold, each one reinforcing the importance of my role in protecting the sanctity of the Eucharist. One particular Sunday, however, brought a revelation that would shake my understanding of the seemingly peaceful world within our church. It was a typical Mass, with the congregation filling the pews, their voices rising in unison during hymns and prayers. As communion began, I took my usual position, eyes scanning the line of parishioners. Among them, I noticed a woman I had seen before, but never paid much attention to. She was older, with a stern face and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She approached the altar, received the host from Father Antonio, and, just as I had been trained to watch for, did not consume it. Instead, she quickly slipped it into her hand and began to turn away. My heart pounded as I realized we had another situation. I discreetly informed Father Antonio, who gave me a quick nod and gestured for me to proceed. I signaled the welcome team, and they intercepted the woman as she tried to leave. "Excuse me, ma'am," one of the volunteers said with the practiced politeness. "Father Antonio would like to speak with you." The woman looked annoyed, but followed the volunteer back to the altar. Father Antonio was waiting, his expression composed but serious. I stood by his side, ready to assist. "Good morning," Father Antonio greeted her. "I noticed that you did not consume the host during communion. May I ask why?" The woman's eyes narrowed. "It's none of your business," she replied curtly. Father Antonio's expression remained calm. "I'm afraid it is my business. The Eucharist is a sacred part of our faith, and we must ensure it's treated with the utmost respect. If you have a valid reason for not consuming it, we can certainly accommodate that, but you must tell us why." The woman crossed her arms, her eyes flashing with defiance. "I need it for a ritual," she said bluntly. A chill ran down my spine. This was the second time someone had openly admitted to taking the Eucharist for a ritual. Father Antonio's face hardened slightly. "What kind of ritual?" he asked, his voice firm but calm. The woman hesitated, then shrugged. "It's a personal matter," she said evasively. Father Antonio's eyes did not leave hers. "I'm sorry, but that's not good enough. The Eucharist is not to be used for any purpose other than communion. Please return it now." The woman sighed dramatically but reached into her pocket and handed the host back to Father Antonio. "There you go," she said with a hint of sarcasm. "Happy now?" Father Antonio took the host, his expression grave. "This is not a trivial matter," he said. "Using the Eucharist for rituals is deeply disrespectful to our faith. I must ask you to leave and not return if you intend to misuse our sacred elements again." The woman glared at him, but said nothing more. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the silent church. As she exited, a sense of unease settled over the congregation. After she left, Father Antonio turned to me, his expression serious. "We need to talk," he said quietly. We went to his office, a small room filled with books and religious artifacts. Father Antonio sat behind his desk, motioning for me to take a seat. "I need you to understand the gravity of what's happening," he began. "There are people out there who believe they can use the Eucharist for dark purposes, for rituals that have nothing to do with our faith. This is not just about protecting the sanctity of the host. It's about safeguarding our church from those who seek to misuse its most sacred elements." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "What kind of rituals are they performing?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. Father Antonio sighed, his expression weary. "There are various forms of witchcraft and occult practices that misuse consecrated items. They believe that by using the host, they can harness some form of power or achieve certain outcomes. It's a gross misunderstanding and perversion of what the Eucharist truly represents." His words sent a chill through me. The idea that people were attempting to use our sacred rituals for such purposes was deeply unsettling. "How often does this happen?" I asked. Father Antonio looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "More often than you'd think. It's why we must remain vigilant. We have a responsibility to protect the sanctity of our church and its rituals. This is why I gave you that strange instruction when you became a ceremonialist. It's not just about maintaining order. It's about protecting our faith from those who would corrupt it." The gravity of the situation settled over me like a heavy cloak. I realized that my role as a ceremonialist was more than just performing rituals and assisting during Mass. It was about standing guard over the very heart of our faith, ensuring that it remained pure and untainted by those who would seek to misuse it. As I left Father Antonio's office, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The strange instruction that had once seemed so peculiar now made perfect sense. It was a necessary measure to protect the sanctity of our sacred rituals. I vowed to remain vigilant, to uphold the duties entrusted to me, and to ensure that our church remained a place of true faith and reverence. The confrontation with the woman and Father Antonio's revelations about the misuse of the Eucharist left a profound impact on me. My perception of the church, once a place of pure worship and unchallenged sanctity, was forever altered. I realized that even within these sacred walls, we weren't immune to the darker influences of the outside world. In the weeks that followed, my vigilance became sharper. Every Mass, every communion, was an exercise in heightened awareness. The incidents of people attempting to take the host without consuming it became more frequent, and each time, Father Antonio and I handled them with the same calm firmness that had become our standard response. One particular Sunday, I noticed a young woman in her early 20s. She had a nervous energy about her, shifting from foot to foot as she approached the altar. When she received the Eucharist, she quickly turned and began to walk away, slipping the host into her purse. Immediately, informing Father Antonio and signaling the welcome team to intercept her. This time, the welcome team guided her to a small side room where Father Antonio and I met her. She seemed more anxious than defiant, and when Father Antonio asked why she hadn't consumed the host, she burst into tears. "It's for my sister," she explained between sobs. "She's sick and can't come to church. I thought if I took the Eucharist to her, it might help." Father Antonio's expression softened. He gently explained the proper way to handle such situations and offered to visit her sister himself to provide communion. The young woman, relieved and grateful, thanked him profusely. It was a reminder that not all intentions were malicious, and some were born out of desperation and misunderstanding. However, not all encounters were so benign. On another occasion, a man in his 40s took the host and tried to leave without consuming it. When confronted, he admitted with a chilling calmness that he intended to use it for a personal experiment. The vague and ominous nature of his explanation sent a shiver down my spine. Father Antonio sternly insisted he return the host and warned him never to attempt such a thing again. The man left without further incident, but his words lingered in my mind. These experiences taught me the importance of discerning intentions and handling each situation with care and compassion. Father Antonio often reminded me that while we must protect the sanctity of the Eucharist, we must also show understanding and offer guidance to those who might not fully grasp its significance. One evening, after a particularly intense Mass, Father Antonio and I sat in his office, reflecting on the events of the past few months. "It's a difficult balance," he said, his voice thoughtful. "We must protect our sacred rituals, but we must also remember to guide and educate. Many people do not understand the deep significance of the Eucharist. Our role is not just to guard it, but to enlighten those who seek it." His words resonated deeply with me. I realized that my journey as a ceremonialist was not just about vigilance, but also about compassion and education. Each incident was an opportunity to teach, to share the profound meaning of our faith, and to ensure that those who came to our church left with a deeper understanding and respect for our traditions. I decided say,